subjective opinion. But that's where I think also comes in that clash with liberalism, because liberalism and feminism adjusts with the times and changes. Whether you think it's adjusting for the better or worse is open.
The thing is, that's one of the misconceptions, I would say. Because I would say that all three of those religions, Islam, Christianity and Judaism, all three of them have an inbuilt flexibility of some sorts.
Really?
Yeah. So I've got another book coming out. I've got two coming out soon, yeah? That's why I was quite busy, you know. I've got two coming out. Another one is called the Liberal Critique of Ridda. Ridda is what is commonly referred to as the apostasy law. I made a book about it.
How do you spell it?
R-I-D-D-A. But the thing is, I'll publicize it when it comes out. The point I'm making is this, is that you need to first appreciate that Islam has an inbuilt flexibility. I coined the term in my book, I called it Sharia consequentialism, in the sense that the Sharia is not like a rock, that it doesn't adjust. Imam al-Shafi'i, one of the scholars of Islam, who wrote a book called Al-Risala, which is a book of the principles of jurisprudence, he says, إِذَا ضَاقَ الْأَمْرُ اتَّسَعَتِ الشَّرِيعَةُ وَإِذَا اتَّسَعَتِ الشَّرِيعَةُ ضَاقَ الْأَمْرُ. He says that if the situation becomes more constrained, the Sharia becomes more accommodating. So in other words, it becomes more flexible. Or when the situation becomes more flexible, the Sharia becomes more constrained. In other words, the Sharia contracts, it moves, it's chameleon-like. It's not the rules that apply to 7th century Arabia. Only an ignorant jurist would tell you the same exact parameters apply in the 21st century.
Really?
Yeah, only an ignorant, someone who does not know usul al-fiqh whatsoever. Yeah, if you think that fiqh al-tamkeen, which is the jurisprudence of when you're in a position of power as Muslims, have an empire and so on, is the same as fiqh al-istid'af, which is when you're in a position where you are minorities or aqalliyat as a Muslim minority, then you don't know Islam, because the Prophet did not do this. The Prophet did not act the same way when there was an empire, when there was a big army, as he did when there was a few people living in Mecca. He learnt to deal with the circumstances in a facilitative way and in a compromising way, where the principles of Islam are never compromised, because the Quran says, وَدُّوا لَوْ تُدْهِنُوا فَيُدْهِنُونَ. They want to compromise with you, they would love you to compromise with you so that you can compromise with them. In what? In the usul, in the aqidah, in the principles of Islam, not in the Sharia. Sharia is open to compromise, and the biggest evidence of that is Hudaybiyah.
So then from what you're saying then, since the flexibility there is there within the Sharia,
yes,
it shouldn't really have a problem with liberalism or feminism.
Look, I'm not saying that Islam has a problem with liberalism and feminism. That's never my argument. Okay. My argument is this. We always ask the question, to what extent is Islam compatible with feminism? I'm saying, no problem, it's a good question, we'll answer it. And the answer is to some extent. But there is another question we have to answer, which is, to what extent is feminism, is that compatible with Islam? And they're two different questions. Same thing, if I say, to what extent is Islam compatible with liberalism, it's a different question to asking, to what extent is liberalism compatible with Islam? Now, I'm saying that, look, we should have an equal epistemic weight. When we're starting from the beginning, why do we always have to bend our backs and change our ways for the other person? What we're saying is compromise, which I think is needed. I believe in the accommodative approach. Requires a
that shouldn't be compromised on?
Yes, which are the usul, the aqidah, the things which are like, we believe in one God, we believe the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is a messenger.
Sure.
We believe in the 6 pillars of Iman. These will never be compromised on. However, if someone says to me, this is my argument with the Ridda law, which is referred to as the apostasy law. You have let's say for example you have an Islamic nation now, a Muslim nation. Classically, if you go into the books of fiqh, which is jurisprudence, they will say that the punishment for an apostate, if he's a man, and where he's socially contracted to a state, and so on and so forth, and he goes against that, is like treason, therefore he can be killed. Yeah? However, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in Hudaybiyah, listen to this. This is a true story, all right? And it's narrated authentically in the book of Shurut, in Kitab al-Shurut in Bukhari, right? The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had an agreement with the disbelievers of Quraysh, Suhail ibn Amir, where he said to him, Suhail said to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Suhail ibn Amr, he said to him that if your guys apostate, bring them back to us. In other words, no death penalty, nothing, right? Even if he does it openly and publicly, and all the so-called conditions are met. He says if he does that, bring him back. Therefore, it's just a strategic relocation.
Wow,
what did the Prophet?
Convenient term, no?
Yeah. What did the Prophet Muhammad?
Same thing as imprisonment, strategic relocation.
Okay. Well, look, the Prophet. What did he do? He agreed to those terms, and so what happened? Whenever there was an apostate in one state, he was returned. Now the question is that still applicable today? Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, he says it is applicable today, and he says the majority of scholars say that. If you look at the majority of fiqh opinions, it says that's applicable. So these punitive laws, which have become somewhat of like the main point of discussion for a lot of people nowadays, right? Say, look, Islam allows cutting off hands, and it allows, the death penalty for the adults and this and that. And for the prize horse of that, the prize horse is ridda. You say, how can you not? This goes against human rights. I mean, you say that you believe in la ikraha fi din, no compulsion religion, but at the same time you're killing someone because of the religion, so on and so on. We say no. We say not necessarily. We're saying in certain conditions, yeah, but the Prophet ﷺ, there was precedence from his lifetime where he didn't do that. So if it's within the Sharia ability of a hakim to say, look, if there's a non-Muslim, they'll make a contract with another non-Muslim, a Muslim state. I'm not talking about in the West here, because we know the ruling is none of that is applicable here. We're talking about in a Muslim state. I'm being very clear. Brunei, let me be even more clear. Saudi Arabia. If Saudi Arabia, and I'm telling you this explicitly after I've done my research and I've spoken to the scholars of different denominations. If Saudi Arabia made I'm not using them as a mithali state that they're imposing Islamic law. I'm just saying that they have been imposing a lot of the punitive laws, yeah, which is true. If they done an agreement with the non-Muslim state, say, look, anyone who does apostasy from our side, they won't be killed, or nothing will happen, this will happen, X thing will happen, which is agreed upon, yeah, that can easily be arranged. Now that's the point.
What is that process called?
It's called an ittifaqiyya. It's called an agreement between two states. The point is, the Sharia has an inbuilt ability to allow for certain things to happen for the maslahah or the common interest of just not only the Muslims but the non-Muslims as well. It can do that. So the thing is, I feel like what's happened in the West, and this is the argument I make in the book, is that you have a concept which is a social contract in liberal theory, and attached to that concept you have things like treason, okay? Treason law and so on, which have death penalty implications everywhere and have historically had death penalty implications. And then you can call this whatever you want to call it. But the thing is, for someone saying or doing something symbolic and non-military, they can be killed and have been killed. I'll give you an example. The case study I use, because I try and use equal case studies in the book, I use a case study of this guy called William Mumford in 1862. He teared down an American flag and got killed. But that's not an aggressive military act. That is a symbolic act. He did something, but that's against, someone would argue that's against freedom of speech. Why did the Americans kill him? This was at the time of Abraham Lincoln. Okay, this was in the American Civil War in 1862. All right, and he was killed for that. The point I'm making here is, it's possible and conceivable, and has been empirically shown historically, even within the most quote-unquote liberal government, and even those states which are based on liberalism, that you can have death penalty implications for what is seen as a breach of the social contract and a breach of the peace.
Sure, but that should still be frowned upon. So just because another system has done something immoral, wrong, or just ill-advised does not sort of cleanse the hands of another system to do the same. So just because what you said is valid. He has been basically killed for a symbolic act. Now, that does not justify this symbolic killing, nor should apostasy be seen as a symbolic, it can be seen as symbolic treason, but you should still not be executed for this.
Alright, sure. Well, so the thing is,
that doesn't, just because you
no
quoted
problem.
an example where it's still wrong, it's just
I get what you're saying. Your argument is valid if you can say, well, the human rights values that we believe in are standalone values, but the reality is that they're an outgrowth of liberalism itself.
Sorry?
human rights and the values that are like in the post-1948 collection of human rights that we have now, of 30 other human rights that are mentioned.
Right.
That collection and those human rights are referred to and previously referred to as natural rights. They are an outgrowth of liberalism. They don't stand alone.
Not necessarily. They can stand alone.
No, but they're not. I'm not saying that they can.
It doesn't, like, look, you can still say the same, that, for instance, someone who grows up in Saudi Arabia is a Muslim, but that doesn't matter. You can grow up in Germany and still be a Muslim. Just because it is linked to these things doesn't mean that they cannot stand alone, just as principles.
Right,
so
if you have those
principles don't need to be based in liberalism.
Good.
They can be based in any political or social system.
No, you're saying they can be. What I'm saying is that there is. So these are two different things. There's a fine line between, right?
Sure, but that doesn't, like, the position of human rights as an outgrowth of liberalism doesn't detract from their merits independently.
I see what you're saying. However, this is what I want to say in return to you. The reason why it's important.
Batteries still recording.
Oh, okay. So what I want to say in response to you is this: liberalism itself has a series of axioms that it depends on.
Sure.
And also presuppositions that it depends on. One of them is that there's that freedom is a desirable thing.
Right.
For example, right?
Yep.
Now, obviously, human rights, it kind of takes from that in the sense that, for example, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and so on, they're seen as desirable. Why? Because the presupposition is that freedom is desirable. With that, there's the definition of freedom as well, which is, according to Hayek, okay, he says that freedom is a lack of coercion, okay? Now, if you want to take those definitions, because at the end of the day, you're going to need definitions to come to a conclusion of what's freedom, so that we can come to a conclusion of, because you can't have freedom of speech without freedom, right? We agree. And if you don't have we don't have a definition of freedom, we can't have freedom of speech. Who offers the definition of freedom? Is it human rights as an ideology, which it isn't? No, it's liberalism, right? So we say, okay, this notion of freedom, if you look at Nozick's writing, he wrote a book called Utopia and the State.
Robert Nozick.
Yes, Nozick. So he wrote a book and he talks about the minimal state and so on and so forth. What I'm saying is he depends on throughout the book he depends on the definition of liberalism, of freedom.
Yes.
Which is the same as we talk about Hayek.
Okay.
All right, so, and the minimalist state is an expression of what is the best kind of freedom, okay? So if you say, okay, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and freedom of religion are good things, because freedom is a good thing. My question to you would be simple. Number one, what's your definition of freedom? And number two, how can you substantiate that definition of freedom? And number three, how can you then prove that it's a good thing? Because you said it's a merit, right? Human rights, which is not an ideology, doesn't have the answers to those questions. In fact, philosophers don't have the answers to those questions. You see, they're axiomatic. In the same way that if I say a tall, short man is a physical impossibility because of the law of non-contradiction. How can you prove the law of non-contradiction? You can't. It's axiomatic. There's no way of proving it.
But there's
in the same way, in the same way, the conception number one of freedom, or the definition of it, which by the way there's disagreement among liberals about, and number two, the postulation that it's a good thing. Both of those things are axiomatic. They're non-proven.
Sure.
Yeah. So then, from that angle, if you say, look, this is wrong. William Mumford in 1862 being killed for just tearing down the flag, or the extrajudicial killings of X amount of Muslims or ex-Muslims or whatever it is in these places in America is a bad thing,
right?
Because it strips them away from their freedom.
Right.
I'm saying to you, according to what notion of freedom?
Right.
And number one, number two, and how can you prove it's wrong?
Right.
Yeah. So these are my questions.
Sure, no problem. So,
what's your name, by the way, sorry? What's your name?
Boyan.
Boyan.
Mohammed Hijab, Assalamu alaikum.
Yeah, Absalam.
Are you a descendant of Adam Thamud?
Maybe. Yeah.
Where are you from, Rich? Sam?
Egypt.
Sam?
Huh?
Sam?
Muhammad.
Oh, Mohammed, sorry.
Yes.
It says Sam here, so...
No.
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Mohammed. Right, so before I even address any of that, like, we always have axioms in any of our assumptions. Like, everything is axiomatic. Like, even like cause and effect. Like, even that is in effect an axiom. Like, just because something has continually happened, like, the sun continues to rise every day, that doesn't actually mean the sun is going to rise tomorrow. This is just an imposition. This is an axiom.
Yeah.
So yes, absolutely, we always have to rely on some base axioms, and the less axioms we have to work with, the more sort of convenient they can be, right? So yes, everything, well, even social political systems have axioms as well as postulates, right? So, I mean, of course,
Absolutely.
anything is going to have a postulate and axiom. So, right, freedom. So the definition of freedom is of course crucial. I wouldn't be able to tell you the sort of dictionary.
Defined in the Constitution.
Lack of coercion.
Defined in law.
Right.
Backed up by the judiciary.
Sure. So, for instance,
That's how it works in this country.
Good.
That's how it works in America.
good. So the way I would sort of define freedom is sort of the ability or the freedom. Just the
Legal
ability.
right
Yeah,
to
just
freedom.
No, just-
Legal right to freedom.
No,
That's
just
how
the
it's
ability to choose without coercion or force, as long as your choices or your actions do not infringe upon the rights of others and do not harm them. Right? Are you satisfied with this sort of definition?
Let me explain something.
Yeah,
Right?
let's not move away before we settle this.
No, you've just imposed the harm principle on the definition of freedom. So but you can't argue in a circle because that would be a. Let me
I
explain.
mean, why do you think it's a circle? Yeah.
The harm principle, which John Stuart Mill talked about,
Yes.
is based on conceptions of freedom.
Sure.
Okay, but you can't put your definition of freedom as the harm principle and then substantiate the harm principle with that definition.
No, but you can call. You can.
So just to be clear of what I'm saying, John Stuart Mill, he uses utilitarian principles to say that the harm principle should be enacted, for example, in society, economy and politics, but more specifically in social liberalism, in society, right? But he starts with a pre-existing notion of freedom. But what you can't do in logic is you can't use a thing to prove a thing. So
I'm not using.
No. So what I'm saying is the liberal assumption, or sorry, the liberal prescription from a social liberal perspective is the harm principle. But before we get to the prescription, we have to go to the definition.
Sure.
So your definition is inclusive of the harm principle. So it's easy to come to a conclusion of the harm principle.
Sure, but that doesn't
Yeah.
look.
So look,
You asked for my definition. I provided.
No.
Yeah.
But the definitions that liberals use, human rights academics use, for example, are in line with what Hayek said.
Sure. and
Hayek defines freedom very simply. He said it's a lack of coercion. That kind of definition is also used by Robert Nozick, okay, and he assumes that definition. So if you were to say that the definition is X, but it's not substantiated in the literature, I would say, look, you have to put your definition in a peer-reviewed journal, people have to discuss it, and then agree on it.
You asked me for my definition.
No, I said the definition.
No, I understood you asked me what I would perceive as.
No, but then if we all work on our own individual definitions,
look,
yeah.
that's fine.
Yeah.
I understood you
Yeah.
asked me for my definition, and this whole tangent wouldn't exist if I was
No
under the
problem.
impression that you like.
No. I want a robust definition, which is understood by people who make it a case for human rights and liberalism.
Sure.
I'm not talking about a definition which you just make up on the spot, without even thinking. Frankly, without even thinking about it properly.
Sure.
Sorry, I'm not trying to.
No.
right?
You're not mistaken in saying that I thought of it on the spot.
Yeah.
That also doesn't detract from the validity of the definition, whether I thought about it for a year.
No,
on the spot.
it doesn't detract from the validity of the definition. But if we're all making our own definitions here,
Sure.
no discussion can progress. Because if I say,
Sure.
what's a
But
tall man?
neither can it-
If I
neither
say,
can it
what's a
progress
tall,
if we just,
what's a
you know-
tall man? I'll say someone who's 6 foot. He says no, it's 6'1". He says no, someone's 6'2". And he says 7 foot. Then I become short.
Sure.
In the conception of him. But tall in the, so the point is, we have to work with definitions which are either available and argued in the literature.
No, in law, it's how it's
That's
operated in law.
fine as well. If you want to
No,
take,
that's the bottom line. That's where the rubber hits the road. In law, that's where freedom falls or
but what's your name?
Bill.
Bill. Look, that's a good approach. But what I want to put to you is that you mentioned America and Britain, right? So in America, the founding fathers of America, when they had the original documents like the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Federalist Papers, and so on and so forth, they based their legal definitions, their constitutional definitions, on number one, philosophical definitions of John Locke and other people. Number two, of pre-existing English precedent law. So, for example, the definitions of freedom of speech, expression, etc. A lot of it was actually taken from English law. And English law, a lot of it was influenced by philosophy. So we're going to end up having that philosophical discussion either way.
Always in philosophy.
Right, there you have it. Yeah.
But they have to make these like philosophical ideas work on a day-to-day basis.
They try to, yeah.
No, that's what they try to do. You're talking about self-harm. You know, you can't ask me, you can't ask this gentleman here to murder